Horses have played a big part in the development of man throughout millennia. In the beginning, the horse would have been hunted for food, but man soon realised that they could domesticate horses and as beasts of burden, and they used them for driving or riding. And as they were ridden, that meant that man could go further, much quicker around the world, which was why man spread around the world much quicker at that stage. In 2500 BC, the Romans used to wrap leather or metal onto the feet of their horses. These were called hippo sandals. This was to protect the hoof of the chariot horses. In 500 BC, in Asia, there's evidence of woven material, plants and leather being wrapped around the horse's feet. But it wasn't until about 2,000 years ago that it's believed that the Romans first developed the horseshoe to be nailed onto the horse's feet. The reason being is that there was wear and tear on the horse's feet as they came up through Europe. And also in northern Europe, the ground was wet and softer, which again softened the integrity of the walls of the feet. Also, when the horses were stood in stalls, they would be forced to stand in their own urine, which would deteriorate the integrity of the feet, which is why these feet were deteriorating. And so they thought they needed shoes. The farrier, I'll start with the blacksmith, he was the person that fashioned the metal, the iron, into things like swords and axes, that type of thing. But he then became the farrier who fashioned the shoes for the horses' feet. So, it was a few years later, when, around about the Crusades, when it was common practice to have iron nailed onto the bottom of horses' feet for ridden horses and also for the farm horses. So what is the function of a horse's foot? So, the horse's foot, as it goes down, spreads. And that causes a little bit of a vacuum, which makes them more footsure as they're going along. And again, if you think of a horse going along the road or down the hill, the ones with shoes on are slipping and sliding all over the place, whereas a barefoot horse does not. The other function of the horse's hoof is as it's lifted up, it naturally contracts, and that pumps the blood back up the system to help the heart. And if you look on the underside of the foot, there's a triangle bit called the frog, and that is the little pump that helps to pump the blood back up to assist the heart's function. And actually, if a horse is ill, and if it's down for maybe more than 2 days, its heart could fail. Horses need to walk, and wild horses, or free-range horses, will walk up to 35 miles a day to look for forage. And that helps keeping this movement going. Whereas a stabled horse has very restricted movement. There are diseases that horses get in their feet. There's things like sesamoiditis, navicular, and I can't remember the other one, but never mind, it will come back to me. But these are all the little bones in the foot which deteriorate and cause pain. There's other things that horses get, things like navicular and tendinitis or sore shins, or even things in their back. What might cause these problems? Well, if you consider nailing a flat piece of metal onto the bottom of a horse's foot, it restricts that natural ebb and flow of the wall of the foot, which then restricts the blood being able to flow, be pushed back up the body. It also restricts the ability to use all of the joints in the legs, and it puts more pressure onto the hocks, the knees, the shoulders and the hips, because you've lost that breakover point of the horse's foot. And the other problem we get is if a young horse has had shoes put on it, that restricts the growth of the foot. And this is common in racehorses. And it's akin to the Chinese women at the turn of the 20th century who had their feet bound at birth, which restricted their ability to move. So, I came across somebody called Hiltrud Strasser over 20 years ago, and she advocated barefoot horses. And having read both of her books, I vowed that I would never put shoes on my horses again, which I haven't. So, her trim, she claimed that she could cure these diseases that I mentioned earlier, these incurable diseases that I mentioned earlier, by her very severe trim. And to be fair, because of the severity of this trim, her method went out of fashion very quickly. However, other vets and farriers investigated how horses in nature, actually out in the wild, how their feet functioned. And the common one to look at was the Mustang in North America. And they looked at how the horse's feet wore itself down, and it became known as the Mustang roll, because they actually had that roll which enabled all of the joints in the legs to function properly. There was another trim that was called the 4-point balance, which was the four corners of the hoof, and they would scoop up between those 4 points, which allowed the hoof to stretch down, to spread on the way down, which helped that pump action. So horses have self-regulating feet. My horse, Tara, she's now 29 years old. She has never had shoes. She has lived for the last 23 years on my small holding, being able to have the freedom to walk. She hasn't needed a farrier for many years to trim her feet because she has self-regulating feet. And as I said, she has that freedom to roam 24/7, 365. The only thing that stops her is the perimeter hedging. So, the question is, to shoe or not to shoe?